Hello, everybody, and welcome. Hold on, let me just finish this up. Okay, sent. Welcome to the 8th episode of Ocean Classroom Live, and really the second in this mini-series that we're focusing on sharks and our fascination with these incredible animals. By the way, today's episode is being supported by the Devereux Ocean Foundation, and we're so grateful for their support. Thank you, Devereux. So, we've created this ocean classroom to connect, inform, and engage each of us a bit deeper into the ocean, the animals who live there, and the people who conduct critical research that broadens our understanding of the largest habitat we have here on our planet. A blue planet, I might say. And there's a fun story for today, so let's just get right into it. A new discovery can come from the most unexpected places, and that is what today's program is all about, and that is what today's guest, who is a dear friend, is all about. But no matter what, you'll still need some essential elements to make sure that you're ready for those discoveries. So we're going to start with a prompt for you out there, this audience, because we want to make this interactive. And that prompt is to say you're going on a hike, you're going to the beach. You need to take things with you. You need to pack your kit to make sure that you're ready for your experiences and to be open for some new ones. So what are some of the things that if you're bringing on an expedition that you think you would want to have? And it doesn't always have to be to where we're going today, but write some of those in, and maybe we'll get to those a little bit later. Because what happens, if you're willing to be open to those new discoveries, and sometimes if, again, you have a little bit of luck, you can step outside of that comfort zone and really discover something new. And I think that is one of the special things that we get to do as humans. We have this need for exploration. So like the title just said, my name is Alex and I work at the Inner Space Center. It's where I am today, actually inside Mission Control. And it's fantastic to be here at the University of Rhode Island Graduate School of Oceanography, which is the home of our ocean classroom. Now, one reminder, again, while you're writing in those comments, if you're watching on Facebook, please follow us there. And if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe with us on YouTube, because we need your support and your interest in this program. We want to keep doing these. We want to keep inviting people into this program and keeping it going. And like I said, we're going to try to work those questions in. So a few years back, I was sitting here at the Inner Space Center, and I was editing some underwater content. That's what I do here at the Inner Space Center. I work as an editor and producer. And a friend of mine walked in, and his name is Dr. Brennan Phillips. Hey, Brennan, how are you? So Brennan walked in, tapped me on the shoulder, and I took my headphones off, and he started to talk to me a little bit about this project that he was cooking up. Somewhere on the other side of the world, a place called the Solomon Islands. And if we can, let's jump out of the University of Rhode Island here, all the way out to the Solomon Islands, on literally the other side of the planet from where we are. So Dr. Brennan Phillips, my good friend, your goal for this mission was a very specific one. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. Well, hello, everybody. And as Alex said, I was honored to have him along on the expedition as well. The idea for that trip came up probably back in about 2013 when I was still a graduate student. I was also a graduate student at the University of Rhode Island studying oceanography, where I got my PhD. And in 2013, I got the opportunity to go to the Solomon Islands for the first time with a whole group of other scientists on board a really fancy research vessel called the Aleutian. Very highly capable oceanographic platform that has 2 manned submersibles on it, and really pretty much anything you can imagine, all the bells and whistles you need to explore the ocean world is on board this type of platform. So really cool opportunity, but one great thing about one thing I learned from this trip, I should say, is when the vessel is that large and where there's that many complex parts involved, it actually kind of limits you in your ability sometimes to look at some other things that maybe you miss, you overlook, because you're just focused on what the ship is actually capable for doing. So one of those things was this submarine volcano that is in the Solomon Islands. We went near it. I started reading up online about it, thinking that might be a cool thing to maybe send one of the subs down on. And I learned that it was a natural hazard. It erupts all the time. It creates an island all the time. We'll see some video of that coming up in a little bit. But it's very volatile. So everybody on that research vessel, as capable as it was, they didn't want to go anywhere near it for safety reasons. Good reasons to not do that. But there were some local guides and support folks that were on board the vessel at the same time as me. And I started to talk to them. I said, how could we get to this volcano? It's called Cavachi. How could we actually do some science around that location that we can't go right now with this boat? And they suggested a different approach, which was totally different than anything I had ever heard of in oceanography, which was using really small boats, like skiffs, basically, to approach from shore, from their islands. They live right near this volcano, actually. And they said, we can probably get out there with some of our local boats, and if you can adapt your equipment to that. Long story short, I pitched that to National Geographic. I included Alex in that whole plan because I needed somebody to come along and film the expedition and, you know, participate in that. And that got awarded. So thanks, National Geographic. That's really where it started. And they also upped the ante a little bit. They sent in one of their own technology experts, a guy named Brad Henning, who brought a really awesome camera that goes deep in the ocean, but you can deploy it off of any boat. So it doesn't need a crane or an A-frame or any of that large, heavy stuff to get it off. You can just charge it, you know, at home on shore, and then put it off the side of the boat. It'll sink down and then record things underwater and come back to you later on. So we had some really cool gear, but it was really small, very tactical, and went on this kind of a wild expedition to the Solomon Islands. Instead of taking a large boat, we flew there with all of our gear and had to take multiple flights, right? So you start with a big jet crossing the United States, and then across the Pacific Ocean, an even larger jet. Then you land in the Solomon Islands, and then you get into pretty much the smallest passenger plane you can imagine, and then fly to an island far away, about 100 miles out, and land literally in a grass strip that's basically flooded with seawater. It's, you know, and unpack all your gear there and spend the next few weeks trying to get out to the work site. So as you can see on the video here, I mean, it's an absolutely gorgeous part of the planet. The Solomon Islands are comprised of almost 1,000 islands. It's its own nation, all islands. It's northeast of Australia, as you saw on the map coming in there. And the people there are just extremely friendly. They're very excited about what we were doing. They're ocean people. They work mostly in shallow water around the coral reefs, you know, and so we brought gear that could actually look at, you know, the depths around there, and that got everybody excited. So we had full buy-in from the community, full support. Everybody was excited to see what we would find every day, and it was just a really, really wonderful experience. So I think
that's just fantastic, man.
Yeah. So Alex, should I talk a little bit about the tech, or did you want to jump in here at all?
I have a question for you.
Sure.
But before I do that, I just want to remind our audience to write in some of your questions. As Brennan is talking about this really remote place and these people and what it's like to be there and to really conduct an expedition there, write in those questions because we'll bring those in and it'll help drive our conversation today. But for you, Brennan, I have a quick question. There's a nickname for Cavachi, and maybe that was one of the reasons that you wanted to go and study this really phenomenal thing, this under the submarine volcano. Do you know what's the nickname for this? What are is it Cavachi's
oven? So let me just
call it Cavachi's oven.
Yeah. So okay. So imagine a volcano. I'm sure everybody can imagine what a volcano looks like, right? Like a peak mountain, and then if it's active, you'll see some smoke billowing out of it, you know, as it's erupting or something like that. This volcano is underwater completely, but it comes right up near the surface. So the surface is here, and the very peak of that crater is right near the surface there. So it's completely submerged, but it's close enough to the surface that, you know, all the local reef fish and sharks, sea turtles can get to it and access it as if it was a shallow water environment. And so out there, it's a known fishing spot. It's hard to get to. It's close enough to the islands that you can use a small boat, but like only on the best weather days. And so folks don't always get there, but when they do go out there, they're guaranteed to catch fish is sort of the story. And so they call it Cavachi's oven because it's basically a feeding frenzy all the time going on. And that's sort of where the story stops, at least from the Solomon Islanders' perspective. They just know that there's a lot of animals living there, but they don't know exactly why that might be. And so that's what we came equipped with, were a few tools, right? Some cameras, a few sensors, a way to maybe map it a little bit, which is what we did, to get an idea of what this thing actually looks like underwater, where the crater is. It turns out we found that there was a second crater a little bit further to the southwest, of the main crater that nobody knew about. And then we had the right tools to basically explore it for the first time up close. As far as we know, nobody ever has gotten that close with real scientific gear before we did. They had always come with a large boat. So coming at it from this different angle with the local approach and small boats gave us this unique opportunity that nobody else had had.
So cool, Brennan. So one of the things, like we were just talking about in the introduction, is you have to bring certain pieces of kit with you, right? You have to bring certain things. And you mentioned that there was Brad Henning came with us from National Geographic Remote Imaging Department. What was one of those special tools that he brought along that really helped you explore this area?
Well, first I just got to
discoveries.
Yeah, I got to just give a shout out first to Brad and National Geographic. They taught us a lot because they go in the field all the time and they work on whatever boat they get. They're used to working on all kinds of different platforms. And so these people were prepared. They had their kit packed very well, I'll put it that way. And we had our own stuff as well. So we worked very well together, sharing, what we had out there. So the coolest thing that they brought was something called the drop cam. And it's a sphere, a glass sphere that has a camera on the inside and some basic electronics and a battery pack. And the way it works is you basically chuck that over the side of a boat with a weight on the bottom. Imagine a bag of, like a burlap bag of sand. So that's pretty benign, something that will degrade anyways. So that makes it sink. It goes down to the bottom. You usually put some bait on it to attract some fish and sharks and see what might come up. And after a pre-programmed amount of time, it drops that weight. And then the whole rest of the drop camera comes back up to the surface. So it leaves that bag of sand, burlap bag, tied, with biodegradable rope. It leaves that on the bottom of the ocean with each one of those drops. You recover the camera, bring it back, and then you can download the data from it. And that was really the perfect instrument to have because you can drop it and then get away from the hazard zone. So Kavachi is a natural hazard. It is constantly erupting. If you're going to go and get a camera in there, you want to get it in and get it out. And so what you're seeing right here is what Kavachi often looks like. It's doing this type of, phreatomagmatic eruption, which essentially is a submarine eruption that's producing lava and steam at the same time, right? It's just like this big explosion, very dramatic, and very exciting to see and to watch, a little bit scary too. That's normally what Kavachi looks like. But Alex, when we went in 2015, we actually didn't see any eruptions. We got out there and it was flat calm. It was deceiving. I mean, you could see where the volcano is because it was always spewing out a little bit of what's called a plume. So there's some fluids that are always coming out of the top of a submarine volcano, like a hydrothermal vent. And so you could see that expression on the surface. Looked almost like dirty water going by, but we know that that's actually the volcano that's producing that. And we could trace that and basically get right over the peak. So on day one, like maybe you shouldn't go right up to that. By day 4 or 5, we had been out there a lot and we knew that we could maybe get a little bit closer. And we had a really great local guide. His name's Corey Howell. He's lived in the Solomon Islands most of his life, has his whole family there. And Corey knows this volcano very well. He lives very close to it. So he's the local for it. And he could tell, and we trusted him that, well, actually, this might be our opportunity that we could maybe get in some gear and get the camera down right in the crater. And so towards the end, we took a calculated risk, I'll call it. This is not something you want to do all the time, and you want to be very careful about these things, but we didn't go for it right away. We were careful, we were measured about it, and talked all through the plan, and then allowed us, at the end, we did end up dropping cameras right inside the crater, which was really, really exciting. And the reason we get a chance to tell you a cool story today.
So cool, and that's what we're looking at here is not footage from the drop cam, but footage from cameras that were floating along the surface to try to image the volcano. But why don't we go and see this clip, Brennan? And while we're checking out this clip of what that drop looked like, let's hear some of your description about what we're seeing here.
Sure. That up. Yeah. So while that's coming up, I'll just say what I was expecting. We're seeing some really cool sharks that we saw that were there, but that's not the video from inside the crater. These are just all kinds of animals that are living on the outside around there, which you expect to see a lot of cool, interesting biology. What we expected to see when we put the camera right inside the crater was nothing living for sure. Probably some really cloudy orange water is kind of what I expected based on what the surface looked like. And maybe we'd get a glimpse of what the hydrothermal vent that was actually in that crater that's producing that plume. Maybe we'll get a shot of what that looks like. And there are certain animals that do live in hydrothermal vents that maybe we might see there. They're much smaller, usually hang right on the vent site with that. But the biggest surprise that we got out of this was when we put the camera right on the inside. We actually happened to see a lot of the animals that we saw on the outside as well, living inside that crater. And so I think that's going to come up in a minute. But everything that you're seeing here, like a lot of these skates and fish and that sort of thing, they're hanging on the outside. But it seems like some of that biology does actually go inside the crater. Which was really just a total surprise to us. That just blew us away.
That's really interesting, Brennan. And while we're getting this queued up, I promise, audience, we're not doing this on purpose.
No, it's fine.
The suspense. The suspense. Let it build. Let it build. I think it's something really, really interesting, Brennan. Here you are in this place. You've never explored this area in such sort of high resolution of yourself as an ocean explorer, as somebody who's an engineer, of getting to that area, having this sort of culture shock and reality shock of working in a different place, actually being on the ground, not from the distance and the safety of a large exploration vessel, which comes with many, many bells and whistles and great tools for exploring the ocean. However, you decided to go around that, to not do it that style, like you were saying in the intro, to really get up close and personal. Tell me a little bit about just the Solomons themselves. Like you said, these are ocean people. These are people that really are welcoming people. But what is it like to live there? What's it like in the village that we were in? Tell people a little bit about that, and maybe that'll give us time to queue up this video.
Well, yeah, and I think I'll lead right into it too. So, I mean, working there is just really amazing. You go to the capital, what's called Honiara is the capital of the Solomon Islands, and when you land there, you're in a different place. It's maybe 20 or 30 years behind where we are here in the United States. They do have internet and cell phone, but it's pretty minimal. And I think even in that time when we went, they were still using some analog cell phones, so they didn't even have digital cell phones and smartphones or anything like that. So you go to the capital and then you leave that place and then you go to the villages, which is really where we're doing this research. And you have entered a different world than, really the developed world that we live in. There might be a small hut or two that has a solar panel to charge, a cell phone or something like that. But other than that, the lights are off. There's no lights. There's no electricity. Sometimes the only sign of modern history that you see at these villages is an outboard engine, and that'll be attached to a dugout canoe, right? Which is very old school technology and that sort of thing. So that's really refreshing. And, you're eating food that is caught or grown right there. There's really nothing that they bring from the outside. They don't need it. Everything grows there very well. And it's also, you're surrounded by natural beauty. So that's very inspiring. Everything that you see on land going up in these, gorgeous mountains, all the islands are volcanoes as well, whether they're active or extinct. And then you can just imagine what that looks like underwater. So your mind naturally kind of progresses to, well, when that drops off the reef, what's going on down there? And then to bring it all the way back, then of course there is an active submarine volcano almost within sight of this shot that you're seeing right here. It's probably around 20 miles away, but on a really clear day, if the volcano is erupting, you can see it. And one other interesting thing about these villages is that not even if they can't see it, when Kavachi is erupting, their houses actually shake a little bit. And when there's a big eruption, they can feel that as well. So they have this connection with this spot, with Kavachi, even if they've never been out there physically. They know it's there, and they know that it's something to be aware of, maybe scared of, maybe excited about. Everybody would have their own take on that, but it's a presence and it's a big part of their lives. So to go out there and actually get video of what it looks like underwater, I mean, that's very exciting to us, but I mean, imagine that for folks who live there. That is a very important thing for them to be able to see. Very exciting, and the share is really cool too. So yeah, so when we did that, and when we were able to throw the camera in the bottom, and I think we got that video coming up, we saw some really cool stuff. First off, it was amazing we could actually see anything in the first place. We're expecting to see very low visibility and maybe not even be able to see the bottom because there's just so much coming out of the volcano. And yeah, you can see that the visibility is diminished, but when the camera touches down, we can see the bottom, and we can see that there's some things growing on the rocks.
Brennan, this is inside the volcano?
That's inside the volcano. And bear in mind that this camera is baited. So it's got a little bit of tuna fish, raw tuna fish that's caught locally, sitting there just to attract maybe a shark or something if it comes up. And sure enough, they came right up to it. This deployment wasn't very long from my recollection. It was only about an hour or two that it was actually in the crater. And we saw lots of sharks, dozens, I think. There's two species that we count, silky and scalloped hammerheads that you're going to see going by. You see how quick they're moving? I mean, they're just flying by in front of the camera. And that sort of, excited activity is something that you may see outside the crater. I'm convinced that they're moving faster, that they're really agitated inside here. But their presence inside the crater makes really no sense. So if the water is really cloudy and turbid, that's bad for fish kills. That's a known thing that's published. Turbid water kills fish. So like when there's a big fallout of rain, of mud onto a coral reef, that isn't good for anything that's living there. So, okay, so the sharks are dealing with that. Number two, we know the temperature is really hot. So we have temperature sensors, and we know that it's at least 10 degrees Celsius warmer than the background seawater. And the water that's around the crater is bath water. So it's already like really, really, really warm. So this would be as warm as your bath, if not much warmer. And the sharks are in that. So that's another thing that's not really all that normal for them to be in there. And then the last thing is that the fluids that are coming out of the volcano are caustic. So they'll actually cause skin burns. And unfortunately, we found that out the hard way. Corey, our guide, who took that footage that you saw at the beginning, was swimming around the outer edge as safely as he could, but he did get a little bit of the volcanic plume water onto his skin, and he got some minor skin burns from that. So we know that it's caustic. So three things that are against these sharks, and they're in there in numbers, and they're doing something. So, and then of course you saw that video where it actually erupted, right? So it's actually blowing material out of the water and away from itself. I mean, what happened? These are questions we don't have an answer to. What happens to the sharks that are inside there? Do they just get out for a while? Do eruptive phases just kind of void the crater? Or do they actually have some sensory ability to go in and then come back out? And why would they even go in there in the first place? So we don't have answers to all these questions. This is truly just a moment where we see something that's very exciting, very interesting, doesn't make sense, and it opens up a whole other sort of window of, or line of questioning, I should say, to explore further. And that for a scientist is really about as good as it can get.
Wow. That's incredible.
It's fun stuff. I know.
That's
really,
wild.
It's really, really, really cool.
I'm having a tough time being like, was I there or was I not there? I mean, it was, hearing your story again just brings back so many memories of how exciting that experience was. And Brennan, as you found sharks in a volcano. That is an unexpected discovery and something that you would have never, you were open to that. You brought the right ingredients, you had everything sort of come together. And as we're wrapping up and we have a few minutes left in the program, maybe there is possibility that we can throw up some questions. I did see one come up from Barb. Can we bring Barb's question back up? Oh, cool. So Barb was asking, how big are those islands? So now we've explored this a little bit. We've seen some sharks in a volcano, ridiculous stuff. Tell us a little bit about how big are those islands and how many are there?
They're all,
Solomons?
From my recollection, it's like 900 plus, just a hair under 1,000 that make up the Solomon Islands. And they're of all different sizes. So there are some islands that are so big that have cities or, their version of cities and actual roads and cars and that sort of thing driving on it. And then there are other ones that are just tiny little dots. in the middle of nowhere with nothing really on them, maybe one palm tree or that sort of thing. So, and they're growing in most cases. So the Solomon Islands itself, geologically speaking, sits in a very active place, tectonically speaking, I should say, where there's all kinds of islands that are basically building themselves up. There's several active volcanoes in the region and growing landmass there. So Kavachi is one of those things. It's going to be the next island in the Solomon Islands probably. And it has actually formed an island, but then it gets washed back down by the waves. So perhaps in our lifetime, we may see an island form and persist, or maybe it'll come up and wash away again. The scales of this geologic history are much larger than our own lives. So who knows? But yeah, the islands are of all different sizes. And the cool thing is we actually get to see that happening with Kavachi. We get to see that island building process in front of our eyes.
So cool. All right, let's do another one. Are there unique species of fish that are only in this ecosystem? Yeah, that's a great question for the Solomons.
It's a really good question. From what we have seen inside the volcano, there's nothing new, but I think we haven't looked close enough yet. The large things that we can see in the video, the silky shark, the scalloped hammerhead, and there's two kinds of fish too, I should say, reef fish. There's giant trevally and some kind of snapper, I forget off the top of my head. And those fish are readily identifiable. So those are fish that live on coral reefs right nearby, and they're living in this environment that they shouldn't be in. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we looked a little bit closer, if we were able to collect some rocks, something that, things are actually growing and living on, if we would maybe find something new in there. And that's just a matter of looking a little bit closer. So I think we have a lot more to discover about that area.
The true nature of science there.
Yeah.
Right? The ability to go there with questions and come back with more questions.
Sure.
So here we go for another question.
Mm-hmm.
Hello from Miami, Florida. From your estimate, did you see a lot of biodiversity? I heard deep sea vents have a lot of biodiversity relative to the seafloor, but I wonder how many shallow species recruit and specialize there. This sounds like a scientist himself. Thank you, Kevin, for the question.
Well, you brought up some really interesting points. Well, Kevin, thanks for that. I think there's two things I want to mention in a response. I would say the Solomon Islands in general are a known biodiversity hotspot. That's one part of the strategy of going to do science there and do oceanography there, is that you might, you're almost guaranteed to see something new. And from a biological perspective, there are many examples of new species that have been described in not just marine species, just species in general, terrestrial, aerial, underwater, described in the Solomon Islands. So it's extremely highly biodiverse. But in the volcano itself, I think you're seeing lower biodiversity. I think you're only going to see animals that are specialized, that are able to handle that type of environment. So that's in high contrast to what's surrounding it. I think there's just, it's almost like a bottleneck. There's only a few that are going to actually be able to live in here. And there's probably a few specialists, but we haven't, like I said earlier, we haven't found them yet. If I could see the question again, oh yeah, I remember now. There was another follow-up question about how do shallow species recruit and specialize there? Well, ignoring the shallow part, this is just a really quick segue. On another expedition in 2017, I think it was, on board another large research vessel, Bob Ballard's EV Nautilus, which is very closely tied to the University of Rhode Island. So this is a group of scientists from URI that were doing this expedition. I was lucky enough to be part of that. We were working in the Galapagos Islands along a hydrothermal ridge. So it's a spreading area where there's a lot of hydrothermal vents and a lot of activity. And we found a lot of skate eggs that were laying along the seafloor, basically in line with where all the vents were set up. So here's a clip, here's an image of one of those skate eggs. This is in the deep ocean. So off the top of my head, around 1,600 meters deep. It's about a mile down. And we saw a lot of these skate eggs, again, sort of wedged in between the cracks, where we would also stick a temperature probe in and measure the temperature around the eggs. So this is actually another great example of acting on the fly. We didn't expect to see those skate eggs. We didn't know exactly what to do. We didn't have a plan. But during the course of this ROV dive that you're seeing here, we saw the eggs and we said, well, we should probably start measuring temperature and paying attention to what it is around these eggs. And let's start counting them up. And let's make notes every time we see those eggs. And afterwards, we were able to go back and show that the skate eggs are laid right where there's warmer water. And we published a really great paper on this that shows that these deep sea skates are actually likely laying their eggs near the warmer water to speed up their incubation time. And so this is an animal that is apparently specialized, at least its reproductive activity, to focus on hydrothermal activity, which is a submarine volcano. Okay, this is basically the Earth doing a similar cycle as Kavachi is, just in the deep ocean. So, and then I'll stop here, but it's really exciting to me to see that kind of thing, because the skates are also an elasmobrink, so very closely related to sharks. Okay, and those animals have lived a very long time on this Earth. And during the period of time that they have lived on this planet, which is about 500 million years or so, very long-lived creatures, there have been many events of increased volcanic activity. In some cases where almost all species in the ocean have been wiped out because the volcanoes have been too active. But the sharks and the elasmobrinks have survived. They've made it through that bottleneck. So the fact that we see them specializing and doing some kind of reproduction around hydrothermal vents, then we see sharks that are actually living in an active volcano, right? And there's some other examples we've been able to pull from some other papers, and kind of synthesize this. It just kind of shows that sharks seem to like this stuff, or at least they're able to withstand it. And there's some more that we're kind of digging into now to learn a little bit more about that type of relationship. So I think there's more than just Kavachi is the takeaway. I think there's a lot more to explore between sharks and volcanoes and hydrothermal vents.
Wow, so the Sharkcano may live on.
I think it will. I think we're going to see more. Yeah.
No, and it's just great stuff. And I think we'll wrap up here with one more question. And yeah.
Oh, I love that question. I can read it right now.
Yeah, go ahead, Brennan.
Can you record how often the eruptions happen and if they occur on a regular basis? Okay, so there's a global network of seismometers that are out there that you can go on and you can find out wherever earthquakes are happening. Kavachi, as explosive as that eruption was that you saw, it doesn't register on the seismometer network. So what exists in terms of that infrastructure doesn't record the eruptive events we see there, or at least most of them. Maybe a really, really big eruption will get recorded, but by and large, that eruption right there, that's not setting off any seismometer that's nearby. And there are a few in the Solomon Islands. So what we need to do is put out some equipment and start monitoring it ourselves. And that's a project. I think I've pitched it at least in one proposal. It hasn't flown, but we'll keep trying and put something out there to measure how often that eruption happens. Until then, it's really just whoever happens to see it from shore, which is really hard to do. And then anytime anybody makes a trip out there, which again is very rare, we kind of obviously make notes what the eruptive activity was like there. And the takeaway is that it's almost always erupting. And when it is, it's doing it like every few minutes. So it's very active. It's constantly doing this type of thing. So at the end of the day, what we saw on the expedition that Alex and I went, we were able to put a camera in there. That was a rare event. That was a very serendipitous set of circumstances where it was allowing us to get in there. We had the right tools. People who are really not myself, who are smart enough to say, "Oh, actually, we should probably use this equipment in this way." We worked on that plan together, and now you get to see the result of that, which is really cool.
It sure is, Brennan. It sure is really cool. And to kind of segue into that, that's the theme of today's conversation and the episode, is that sometimes when you may not have all the pieces to make the plan and put it all in place and to be able to predict the outcomes, but if you're willing to step out of your comfort zone, which we both did in going on this expedition, if you're willing to bring the right ingredients that may help you make a discovery of something new and something interesting, it just may actually happen. So that's just fantastic. And just in closing, there's a couple things that I wanted to mention. And as you were saying, you've now sort of grown this research, the shark research, and where sharks in their proximity towards volcanoes or warmer water has now been able to keep on going and growing. And the point is the science keeps going, right? And your process as a scientist keeps going. But there's also some communications work and storytelling for those of us who are not trained scientists to help us understand these types of discoveries. And I know right now in SharkFest, National Geographic's focused week on sharks, there's a documentary called is it the Sharkcano? Did they call it the Sharkcano?
I think it's called Sharkcano, yeah. And that's airing right now. You can watch it online on SharkFest, and it shows what we've shown you here, plus a little bit more footage from our expeditions there. And then it also shows some really other interesting stuff about other volcanoes around the world, and also just sharks in general, exposing them to different magnets and different types of temperatures to try and like home in a little bit more on, the actual behavioral response to what we saw at Kavachi. So there's a lot more behind it. The show's pretty good, so check it out.
Awesome. And I hear you have a cameo in there somewhere.
Somewhere in there.
You're getting famous, man. It's good to know you.
Well, if I can put a closing line in here, Alex, I mean, for everybody else who's watching here, I mean, sharks and volcanoes, I get it. It's got a lot of buzz around it, and it's getting you. But this type of stuff is happening at URI all the time. Okay, so the Narragansett Bay campus has a graduate school of oceanography. We have ocean engineering as well on that campus, and some really talented professors, scientists, and students and staff who are exploring our world's oceans all the time. And then we have the Inner Space Center as well, which is able to produce media like you're seeing today. So, I'm very proud to be able to be part of that community. And if Sharkcano is what gets you, that's great. But there's all kinds of other cool stuff to check out that we're doing here at URI.
That was a good plug, Brennan. So with that, I think it's a good time we can close out here. Thanks everybody for sticking around. This was our longest one yet. 38 minutes. What? People are still here listening to us. This is cool.
That's great.
We must be doing something. Again, thank you, Brennan, for making some time to be here. It's great to talk to you again.
Yeah.
And for everybody out there, I just wanted to quickly plug our next episode, which is going to be our third episode in this mini series focused on sharks. But this one is going to take a little bit of a different tack. And that's going to be on August 27th when we're talking to one of the founders of a new organization that's very recent called Minorities in Shark Sciences, Jasmine Graham, and one of the members of Miss Triana Alvarez. And they're going to be here, and they're going to be able to talk to us a little bit about what it's like to experience shark science from an underrepresented minority perspective, to see those examples, but also what it means to reach behind you and to forge a path forward to bring people up. And I think that's a special thing that we're getting a lot more chances to talk about in oceanography and in science in general. I think we have a great context happening in these days. So again, Brennan, thank you. Thank you to the Devereux Ocean Foundation one more time for supporting this programming. And thanks to all of you out there listening to this, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube. Remember, subscribe to those, keep your interest coming in. And I think with that, we'll close it out. This has been our 8th episode of GSO Ocean Classroom, the one focused on Sharkcano with Dr. Brennan Phillips. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thanks, Alex. Thank you, Inner Space Center.
Oh.